It's Hunter here, Rect America, and we are delighted to have back with us Dr. Jimmy Jarvis. Dr. Jimmy, how you doing, man?
Doing pretty well today, Hunter. Where are we going?
Where are we going? Well, I thought we would do some kayaking in from based on our last conversation, and
Hmm.
I thought we put our kayaks in the River of Denial.
Yes, sir. I'm very
Yeah.
familiar with it and some of its
So,
tributaries.
yeah. Okay. Stay. I love it. Man is on point. So yeah, so that's where we kind of left off. So why don't we go there and talk about, you know, how you first let's define for audience, I don't assume anything. Use the term river denial. What do you
Yes.
how define that for us? How do you open that up for us? What's it mean?
Okay. It's a term I've used in the rooms of recovery pretty regularly. That's where I first heard it, and it came to me as something that was very applicable to me. It describes how I chose to deny certain facts about myself and about the world that I was living in. So when I'm in denial, I talk about being that's what I mean by the so-called river of denial. Denial, as was has been said in the rooms, denial is not just a river, as in a river in Egypt. Okay,
Okay.
we know denial is a river east of the Mississippi, but denial is also where I've spent a good portion of my life denying my feelings, denying the reality of the world around me, with major consequences and damage. So
What
that's when I talk about the river of the Nile. That's where it comes from. So it's kind of a joking term, but it has a very serious subject behind
terms of consciousness for you, where do you enter? Where does that enter your conscious thought life?
it. Well, and again, this is where I talk about tributaries. I don't think I started denying much of the world early on, but when I chose very early on in a less than articulate way, this is when I'm 4 years old, 4.5 to be more precise. When I was very lonely and chose and said to myself, I'm never going to feel this lonely again. That was the beginning of my journey down this river of denial, if I can play with the metaphor a little bit. This is me saying, I'm not going to feel something I feel. This is me denying an aspect of my reality, which is my feelings. I will not feel this again. It was so painful to that little guy, and he didn't know what to do with it. So for me, and again, this is after years of reflection, recovery work, therapy work, variety of things, but this is how I piece it together. And that is a starting point. I mean, there are other elements feeding into this, just to carry the metaphor, if you will, other streams of thought and activity. When I choose not to feel something, then I'm partitioning off part of myself from the rest of me. I am compartmentalizing,
Mm-hmm.
I'm boxing something out, which means I'm boxing me in. Okay. So this leads to, through other situations where I am frustrated about certain things, I'll box out my anger and put that in a box and set it aside. Um, but at the same time, these things are still part of me. These emotions are still part of me. The emotions are still going on, whether I like it or not. And if I'm choosing not to feel them and not to accept them and acknowledge them, well, they'll still work on me, even though I don't work on them.
Mm-hmm.
And that activity has an effect on the rest of me. But I chose not to feel it. I chose to bottle it up, and then they'll come out sideways. They'll come out in different ways. More recently, in terms of my being very sarcastic in a variety of situations where things were not necessarily under my control. Um, so, so a lot of different things fed into this. But as I compartmentalize myself, I came to learn that I could compartmentalize myself. So I became more aware of the fact that, well, there was something behind a mental or emotional wall. And I was happy to have the wall. That meant I could wall off other things. So I could begin, for example, to have my own solitary activities that nobody else needed to know about. Thus, the beginning of secret activities on the side. Initially, they were just me not doing what parents wanted me to do, me going off and reading or doing something else. Eventually, it was how I stumbled across pornography, and sexual material, and got into sexual activities. I already had established a mental mechanism for setting it aside, doing it in secret, keeping it separate from anything else that was part of my life. So all of this is building, if you will. So these tributaries are coming together into my version of denial.
Mm-hmm. Couple of questions come to mind. Well, first, a thought. You've given utterance, you've given meaning or definition to us being as sick as our secrets. Mm. And you've certainly, in opening up for us, and thank you for that hearty definition, used the term several times, compartmentalizing. And you can compartmentalize. Is compartmentalizing a fancy term for lying? How, I'm wanting to,
Not necessarily.
Okay, so,
Not necessarily, because it's not lying when I choose to focus my attention in a particular area. When I've made a commitment to do something, and I choose not to focus on the other things around me, but to focus on the one thing. In essence, I'm compartmentalizing my activities and saying these other outside activities are just not going to interfere with what I'm doing right now. That's a version of compartmentalization in and of itself. Is it denying that the other things exist? Not in and of itself. The other things still exist, okay? But right now, I am focused on interview with you, Hunter, and yet there are commitments elsewhere that I'm choosing not to undertake and not to focus on right now. That's still a form of compartmentalization. What happens, however, with the practice of compartmentalization is these compartments, instead of having a flexibility of being able to move from one to the other regularly, we can choose to block out portions of reality. The lie is in the actual blocking, not in the compartmentalization, may I suggest. So it's a couple of different psychological processes.
Okay. The lie is in, say it again, the lie is in what? The lie
is in the blocking out.
Blocking out, meaning what?
Blocking out of selective parts of reality.
Okay.
As opposed to the choice to focus on a particular part at any one time. The focus in and of itself doesn't have to be bad. The focus can be bad, but I'm saying it doesn't have to be.
So let me see if I practically understand by asking this question. I remember you sharing with me one time, Dr. Jimmy, receiving a birthday card with a cat on it, a cat which had devoured some chocolate cake, and with cake across its face, would ask about what happened to the chocolate cake. Cake? What cake? Was that compartmentalizing or lying?
That was lying. Like I say, that wasn't simply focusing on the cake. The cake was gone. That was lying. Okay? That was blocking out the reality that had been a cake there in the first place. That's blocking, and that's lying.
That's like,
How's it
all
go?
right. Yeah. Trying to make it plain. Okay.
I hope that helped to clarify.
Okay. With that understanding in mind, we're
Okay.
good to go. Okay. So, any other with that? Thank you.
Like I say, that was the beginning, and this process, this and other, so again, as young children, there's only certain psychological techniques we can be aware of. Our brains are just not developed enough, and so we become more sophisticated, more capable of a variety of psychological processes later on in our lives, and that can be both good and bad. But some of the basics can be there still later on. So compartmentalization can begin early on, and yet we can continue to use that technique, like I say, for good or ill.
Coping mechanism, right?
It's a coping mechanism, yeah.
Right. Okay.
Very much so. And it can lead to, when trauma occurs, compartmentalization allows us to dissociate so that we can survive the trauma. The problem is, with all apologies to Johnny Cochran, we're doomed to repeat what we do not complete. Meaning, we may have set it off to the side. We still have to negotiate it. We still have to come to terms with it one way or another, or the trauma continues to aggravate and assault our senses.
And you went back, thank you. You went back to 4. So that was is that for you the beginning of where this trauma began? Where trauma began for you identifiably? Is that what we're understanding?
To the best of my understanding, yes.
Yeah.
That's and again, I've done a certain amount of work. Doesn't mean there wasn't something before, but that's what I recognize.
That's what you recognize.
Where again, I had something, I couldn't deal with it, I set it aside, and it wasn't for another 50 years before I dealt with it.
So, what are some of the high water marks, if I can use that, of your using this coping mechanism strategy, your compartmentalizing? What are some of the major ways over again, this is that river denial over time, how you employed this to as you move forward?
It's been useful at various points. As I'd just thinking through, it was one thing to discover porn and to be inspired, titillated, attracted to it. It's another thing to use it as a way of escaping other things. I had an early fascination with it, 10 or 11. It wasn't until I was dealing with some life stresses later on, particular what comes up is my parents' divorce and things happening around that, where porn became an escape from the stress of the situation. So that's one example, and I found it useful. I found it useful there, so I would find it useful elsewhere where I was having difficult coursework in college. I could escape to porn for a little while. As I got into the early careers of my young adulthood, again, I would find ways to escape into porn. The thing is that it wasn't stimulating me enough. So I'd actually begin to experience some of what I was fantasizing about or seeing or whatever, and started playing that out with sexual partners as well. Uh,
I was going to ask you,
mm.
was there ever, for you, was it ever titillating, or was it just a, you know, I was was it visual? When I said there was a visual attraction to it, or was it just more of form of coping and escapism for you?
No, it was both.
It was both.
It,
Okay,
it,
okay, yeah, okay,
Mike, it was both. I mean,
okay,
it was the titillation and attraction first. Before it was the coping
okay.
mechanism, if you will.
Got it.
At least in my case.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how it is with everybody, but
Mm-hmm.
it was for me.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, but then again, I needed more to drown out the voices in my head that were often shaming me for escaping from whatever the stress was at the time. Because I should have been, shoulda, coulda, woulda. I should have been doing something else. But here I was taking a break, stepping out of bounds, going into my secret space, secret life, all of which was very, very shaming to myself. So,
So it sounds as you describe it like a clusterfuck, a train wreck, run, train run off the track. Did it seem to you like you were ever overtaken, like it was just overtaking you, like it?
eventually, but it took a while.
Mm,
So this wasn't something that I indulged every day from the age of 15 on. For example, it was intermittent at first. It was progressive. Um, no, it wasn't until I was in my 40s that that I became aware of it overtaking my life, shall I say. I mean, certainly I was used to a variety of stressful situations, and indeed with my educational background, with my coping skills, I found that I did very well in high stress situations professionally. And if you do, well, you can be rewarded for it, and I was, and I did quite well, but it came at a cost. And that cost was, if you will, a portion of my sanity, as I needed escape. I needed to step away into my secret life just to indulge myself, get a break, um, before I could come back and keep doing whatever I was doing.
Was this ever was this, as you describe it, from early childhood to you say 40, whatever? Um, was this fun? Were you enjoying this? Was this enjoyable to you?
Um, yeah, not always, often. It was exciting.
Yeah. Okay.
It was completely outside of my everyday experience, and so I was yeah.
Gave you
I was
got a
looking for a
rush.
thrill.
You got a rush.
I needed a
You gave a
rush.
rush.
That's right. That's right. It helped. It helped me to have emotions that I could understand, and then I could shut it down and get back to whatever my life was at that point. Okay. So yeah, so there was some enjoyment. There was payoff in there for me.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. It's payoff. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And were there ever some so did you ever get busted? Did there were times where you it over whatever, and you had to yeah, you want to talk about that at all?
Eventually, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no, eventually I was busted, and I've been busted more than one time. I would amass hordes of porn, and my wife would discover it, and I'd make strenuous efforts to destroy it and throw it away and say I'll never do it again. And that probably happened. Let's see. That probably happened for the first time when I was 38, and the second time when I was 43. And again, the ultimate bust was when I put my wife in the hospital with a sexually transmitted disease and came clean. When I just before I turned 50. So now that wasn't the last time either. Okay, because I even though I knew I was in trouble, it was such a habit that I would return to it, even with that situation under my belt.
After you put your wife in the hospital with an STD and came clean, you still engaged in this behavior?
I still went back to it, not immediately. I was absolutely horrified for about 8 months as I began my recovery program. But I was still under stress and was trying to work recovery program, and I still fell back to default behavior, which included this. So, so it was another 4 years where I was still acting out with other people. The frequency had dropped dramatically, but I was still doing it occasionally. And I got busted a couple more times, for example. So,
how do you explain after that momentous situation in your life, in your lives, the two of you? What causes you to have to go back? What caused you to go to revisit engaging that behavior? Can you share that with us? Well, I mean, because there's
a short answer and a long answer.
Okay, well,
I'll start with a short
answer. Thank you.
Okay, hang on a sec.
Sure. You were saying, you were saying.
Yeah.
My question was, what would?
Why would I keep going back?
Yeah, right.
After that massive rupture in my primary relationship, the short answer is addiction. I was trapped in patterns I didn't know how to get out of. Okay, the longer answer looks something like this. I had, over a period of 35 years, developed habits of coping with stress in my life by acting out sexually or acting out with work. Okay, and so when I come under stress, what do? I either work or I go have sex. Okay, because that's what I knew how to do. And that's what I trained myself to use as go-to responses, since I didn't want to feel the feelings associated with the stress. So rupturing my primary relationship was very stressful, to say the least. Not just for my wife, certainly for my wife, but also for myself. So what do I do with stress? Well, there are still a couple things I need to do. I worked very, very hard and made lots of money, okay, because I could make lots of money working very, very hard. But at the same time, that only took me so far. I still needed, in quotes, needed something else. And the only other thing I knew at that point was the sexual acting out that I was doing. So I white knuckled it for 8 months
Mm-hmm.
and then dipped my toe in or something else in. And occasionally I would still fall back to that, even as I was working recovery or attempting to work recovery, attempting to get honest both with myself and with others. But it was far from perfect. So it took another 4 years.
Mm-hmm. I want to interject something here, Dr. Jimmy. Um, um, as you've laid this out, another track of thought around the behavior here that you're sharing with our audience, and we're thankful. That is the existence of a character. That this isn't just aberrant behavior, just not just coping mechanism, not just compartment. That this is part of who we are, and however, whatever that trauma going back produced, but there's a character that's a part of, I just say, part of your personality that has evolved over time, that is as much who you are as who you are as a husband, a father, who you are professionally, that 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 there are roles that we all play in life, but behind those roles, there are aspects of our personality that we call character. I'm referring to as a character, that are as germane to who we are as any other role we play. What do you think about that?
No, I agree. And you say character, and I'll suggest characters, plural.
Okay. Okay.
I have a better idea understanding them intellectually than identifying them internally myself, may I suggest? So that's more will be revealed on that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, sure. Yeah.
Because it's unclear to me exactly which parts of what traits are associated with which characters in my life, shall I say. So there's a disentangling process that I still need to pursue to better identify the characters and their roles in my life.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That being said, so I heard you just shared your explanation for what caused you to go back.
I did.
And let me push back a little bit here. I hear your explanation. What do you think of the notion, the idea that some character that's a part of who you are, in spite of how bad that was for your partner and for you, but that character just ain't quitting. It's just, what about that?
Well,
that?
That's a legitimate approach to this. I interpret it as a rather adolescent part of myself, as I see it. Meaning it took form generally in the period of my um, early emotional adolescence, in which I got stuck when I chose not to feel my feelings, but instead um, shoved them down, put a lid on them, separated myself from them, if you will. And that may have started at 4, but that really revealed itself when I was under emotional stress later. When did that occur? That really didn't occur until that time around my parents' divorce. There were other things going on then too, but that puts it in a 15, 16, 17-year-old range. And again, that's the sort of thing that I talk about. I'm doomed to repeat because I did not complete the emotional process associated with it. So there's a very adolescent character continuing to drive the bus is another expression I'll use. Who's actually in charge of my behavior at any one time? Okay, is it my 2-year-old? Is very primitive fear? Is it the so-called adult who knows how to cope with a variety of crises and situations, and also knows when to not cope, when to deal with things in the so-called adult way? Or is it this adolescent that I'm talking about? This other part that is reactive and has some skills, some survival skills, but not a full set. And that character, when that character is driving the bus, watch out.
Right.
Things are going to get interesting, and they have.
With you there. It sounds like they have gotten quite interesting, to say the least. I hear something else, though,
Okay.
and you tell me if I'm hearing you out correctly. In your and let me just say thank you for affirming my use of this idea around characters and your being able to embrace that and flow with me there. And as you did that, I glean that in the work you've done, in recovery and therapy, whatever work, that you have some comfort that it's okay. You're in an okay place. Is what I'm trying to say. What I'm saying with how things have seemingly unfolded. You seem to be right now in an okay place. Can you talk about that?
Yes, I can. It has been a lengthy process for me, but again, I've said it. I'll keep saying it. I am doomed to repeat what I do not complete. Has a lot to do with this journey to acceptance, which is what you see manifest in me now. Because there's a certain settledness to me. There's a certain peace. There's less turmoil. I'm not saying there's none. I mean, we're living in a pandemic. There's turmoil, but at this time, I have a sense of peace about my being as a result of having worked through issues which had bothered me and I had chosen to ignore or to avoid or to put the lid on, as I've said before. And it was important for me to take the time and spend the capital, both in terms of my time and finances, whatever it took, to find ways to express what I was feeling at the time of the trauma or the turmoil that had been bothering me for a long, long time. And that takes a variety of forms in the therapeutic world. And I like to say that I've bought at least 2 therapists BMWs with what I've paid for in psychological counseling. let alone
Wow.
the work I've done in these rooms of recovery that we cherish so highly. So it was a combination of things. I had to understand the false empowerment that I had as a child, where I was told I was the hero child. I had to work through thinking I could control everything, including my parents' marriage. I mean, childish notions, but these thoughts underlay much of my drivenness in later professional life. And again, I'm rewarded not for what was driving me, I'm rewarded for the outcome of my behaviors of being driven as a result. So this was just layered on other things that had to be worked through. So I needed to go back, work through those, and it was as a result of addressing that turmoil, coming to terms with myself, coming to terms with how I understood my past, that I was able to get to a point of acceptance that allowed me to be at peace with the characters in my soul. All of them. And are we a perfectly happy family? No. That adolescent still tries to drive the bus occasionally. I can still get triggered, by certain situations, and it's incumbent upon me to A, be aware of it, and B, choose to do something about it, whatever that looks like. Okay, but that's a process, and I'm not perfect at it, nor is my partner. But between us, we've learned to love each other's faults. They are gifts.
Yeah. Paying for 2 BMWs. You must have been fucked up. Well, just kidding, Jay. Not just kidding. Yeah. as Daffy Duck was, I resemble that remark. But I like, and this is where we're going to pick up next time. I like the last thing you just said, and that is the gift. Want to go there next time. It's one thing. It sounds like that peace that you found. If I can say, I relate to that as a slice of heaven on earth.
Yes, you can.
Yet another thing is to identify a gifting around all this that's even greater than even that slice of heaven. Because that gifting, I would suggest to you, begins to open the door to the heroic. And that's where we want to go next time. But your closing thoughts.
My thoughts are that without the gifting, heaven on earth is not possible.
All right.
Just to corroborate what you're suggesting, it's only through the gifts that I can have the peace that allows me to experience serenity through the gifts. Let's hold that thought.
Let's hold that thought. Dr. Jimmy, awesome, man. Awesome. Thank you. You blessed us. Right to America, Dr. Jimmy, bless us again. Thank you, Dr. Jimmy. We'll talk to you next time.
Next time, Hunter. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Blessings. Bye-bye.